She found him in the atmospheric control room, was running from embassy systems directly into the damaged port behind his ear. Blood streamed from his nose. His eyes were vacant, distant. "Declan, stop. You're killing yourself." His voice was eerily calm. "My life for 300. Fair trade." "No, not acceptable." He looked at her one last time. Something in his expression looked like peace. Sometimes, he whispered, the empty spaces are exactly where they need to be. Lysa's voice softer now, reflective. But this story didn't start with sacrifice. It started 20 days earlier, when I could no longer remember what silence sounded like. The Vesperi ship descended through Nevada's twilight like a falling star that had learned patience. From the observation deck, Sovereign Lysa watched the rust-colored mountains rise to meet her, their ancient faces catching the last gold of a sun that was not her own. 20 days. 20 days since she had last closed her eyes and found anything resembling rest. The ship hummed with a frequency that would have been soothing to any other Vesperi. To Lysa, it was simply another voice in the chorus of 10,000 minds that pressed against her consciousness like hands against glass. Her people, her subjects, her burden. She pressed one translucent palm against the viewport. The skin there was nearly transparent in the dying light, revealing the faint tracery of veins that pulsed with a silver luminescence. A human physician had once told her it looked like lightning trapped beneath ice. She had thought it a beautiful observation. Now she simply thought of it as another cage. "Sovereign," Counselor Theron's voice carried the particular harmonic that meant concern. He stood in the doorway of the observation deck, his ceremonial robes shifting through shades of amber and deep gold. The colors were meant to convey confident stability. Lysa could feel the anxiety beneath them like a second skin. She did not turn from the window. "I know what you're going to say." "Then you know that I must say it regardless." Theron moved closer, his footsteps making no sound on the crystalline floor. "You haven't slept in 20 standard days. You're hemorrhaging empathic energy. The medical advisors say your neural pathways are showing signs of permanent degradation." The medical advisors say many things. Lysa's reflection in the glass looked hollow. When had her eyes become so vast? When had the silver of her irises begun to swallow the whites entirely? "They cannot fix what is not broken." "This isn't broken." Theron gestured at her, at the faint tremor in her hands, at the way her robes cycled through colors too quickly, unable to settle on any single emotional frequency. "You're the vessel for the seventh house. 10,000 souls depend on your clarity, your strength. If you collapse during these negotiations, I will not collapse." The words came out harder than she intended. Lysa softened her tone, an effort that cost her more than it should have. "I am 237 years old, Theron. I have endured conquest, plagues, the death of the fourth moon. I can endure 5 days of human diplomacy." The ship's descent thruster engaged. Through the viewport, Lysa could see the Nevada extraterrestrial embassy compound spreading across the desert floor like a geometric flower. Humans called this land empty. She could already feel it teeming with their particular frequency of consciousness. Sharp, jagged, endlessly, exhaustingly alive. Theron moved to stand beside her. For a moment, they were simply two Vesperi watching an alien world rise to meet them. Then he spoke, and his voice carried a gentleness that made her chest ache. "Kelrus would not have wanted this for you." The name landed like a stone in still water. Kelrus, her consort, dead 50 years now, a length of time that should have dulled the edge of loss, but somehow never did. He had possessed a rare gift among their kind, a mind that generated almost no empathic resonance. To stand beside him had been to stand in a pool of cool shadow on a burning day. "Kelrus is gone." Lysa's voice was steady. She had practice with this particular pain. "And I am here, and we have a treaty to sign that will feed our people for the next decade. So I will walk off this ship. I will smile at the human diplomats. I will endure their thoughts crashing against me like waves against a cliff. And I will not break." "You're already breaking." Lysa turned to look at him then. Theron, who had served 3 generations of her family. Theron, whose loyalty was as unshakable as bedrock. She let him see just for a moment the depths of her exhaustion. Let the mask slip enough that he could glimpse what it cost her to stand upright, to think clearly, to be the sovereign they all needed her to be. "Then I will break quietly," she said, "as befits a queen." The ship touched down with barely a whisper of displaced air. Through the viewport, Lysa could see the welcoming committee assembling. Hundreds of humans, their minds already broadcasting their various emotional frequencies into the empathic spectrum. Excitement, anxiety, ambition, curiosity. It hit her like a wall of heat. She closed her eyes, drew in a breath that did nothing to calm her, and prepared to drown. The Nevada sun was a physical presence even in the early evening. Lisa descended the crystalline ramp with the careful grace of someone who knew every eye was upon her. Her formal robes had been calibrated to shift through the colors of human sunset, deep purples bleeding into golds, bleeding into the red of dying light. A gesture of cultural respect that had taken her advisors 3 weeks to perfect. The humans had assembled in precise rows on either side of a red carpet that looked almost obscene against the pale desert sand. She could feel their collective consciousness before she could see their individual faces. 623 minds, each one a small sun of thought and feeling in desperate need. At the center of the receiving line stood the official delegation. Governor Marcus Reeves of Nevada, his mind sharp with political calculation. Ambassador Patricia Wolf, broadcasting carefully controlled diplomatic neutrality. Dr. Evelyn Hargrove, the State Department's senior liaison to the vast Perry, whose thoughts carried the particular texture of scientific curiosity wrapped in caution. Lysa walked forward. Each step was a meditation in endurance. The empathic noise was tremendous. Imagine standing in a crowded room where everyone is screaming their innermost thoughts directly into your ear, and you might understand a fraction of what she experienced. But worse than the volume was the texture. Human emotions were not like Vesperi emotions. They were jagged, unpredictable, splashing against her consciousness like acid rain. She could feel Governor Reeves' anxiety about the speech he would give. Ambassador Wolf's carefully hidden contempt for what she considered alien theatrics. Dr. Hargrove's genuine fascination with Vesperi biology and her equally genuine fear of what that biology might mean for human security. Lysa smiled, extended her hand in the human gesture of greeting. Let each of them press their warm, rough palms against her cool, translucent one. Let them think her serene, composed, utterly in control. Inside, she was screaming. The ceremony moved forward with bureaucratic inevitability. Speeches were made. Lysa delivered her own prepared remarks, her voice carrying the harmonic resonances that made human recordings of Vesperi speech sound like wind chimes in a cathedral. She spoke of friendship between worlds, of mutual prosperity, of the hope that this treaty would cement bonds between their peoples for generations to come. Every word was true. Every word was ash in her mouth. And then she began the procession down the receiving line. Hundreds of faces, hundreds of minds, each one a small assault, each handshake a moment of forced connection, where their consciousness crashed against hers and she had to smile through the impact. She was halfway down the second row when it happened. The silence. It came so suddenly that Lysa stumbled, her carefully maintained composure fracturing for just an instant. There, in the line of maintenance personnel and lower-level staff, a pocket of perfect, blessed quiet. She turned her head, searching for the source with a desperation she could not hide. And there he was, a man, human, 30-something years old, though she was still learning to judge their ages. Tall, with the kind of lean build that came from physical labor rather than aesthetic choice. His skin was tan from the Nevada sun, making the pale scar tissue around his left temple stand out like a brand. He wore the standard-issue coveralls of the embassy maintenance staff, and his hands were stained with something dark, oil perhaps, or hydraulic fluid. But none of that mattered. What mattered was his mind, or rather, the absence of it. Where every other human in the compound broadcast their consciousness like radio static, this man generated nothing. He was a void, a pocket of emptiness in the screaming chaos. Standing near him was like putting her head underwater, the noise suddenly muffled and distant. Lysa stopped walking, stared at him. She knew she was breaking protocol. Knew that Theron would be frantically trying to understand why the sovereign of the seventh house had frozen in place like a malfunctioning automaton. She didn't care. The man stared back. His eyes were gray, the color of smoke or storm clouds. There was no recognition in them, no reverence, just a kind of wary confusion, as if he couldn't quite understand why an alien queen was looking at him like he was water in the desert. Sovereign, Theron's voice in her ear barely a whisper. She couldn't answer. Her entire consciousness had narrowed to this moment, to this impossible gift. 20 days without sleep. 20 days of drowning in the collective noise of her people. And here, in the last place she had expected, was an island of quiet. Lisa tried to speak and found her voice had abandoned her. Instead, a small sound escaped her throat. Not quite a gasp, not quite a sob, just an exhalation of desperate relief that she could not suppress. The man's eyes widened slightly. He took a half step back as if her reaction frightened him. And then Theron's hand was on her arm, gentle but insistent, guiding her forward. The procession had to continue. The ceremony had to be completed. She was the sovereign, and the weight of diplomatic necessity was heavier than her own desperate need. But as she moved past, forced her feet to carry her away from that blessed pocket of silence, Lysa memorized everything. The scar on his temple, the calluses on his hands, the badge clipped to his coveralls that read D. Carver, Atmospheric Systems. She walked the rest of the receiving line in a haze, shook hands she did not feel, smiled at faces she did not see. And when the ceremony finally ended and Theron escorted her to the VIP suite in the embassy's East Wing, she went without argument. She had a name now, D. Carver, and a purpose that had nothing to do with treaties or diplomacy or the weight of 10,000 minds pressing against her consciousness. She would find him again. She had to, because the alternative was to drown. The VIP suite was designed to be comfortable for Vesperi physiology. The walls were the color of deep water shifting through subtle shades of blue and green. The furniture was minimal: a meditation platform, a waste reclamation station, a communications terminal disguised as art. One entire wall was transparent, looking out over the Nevada desert as night claimed the sky. Lisa stood at that window for a long time after Theron left. The sunset had painted the mountains in shades of fire, but she barely saw them. Her mind was elsewhere, on a maintenance worker with gray eyes and a pocket of silence where his thoughts should have been. "You're being foolish," she said aloud to her reflection. The glass showed her a woman who looked ancient despite Vesperi longevity. Her robes had settled into a dull gray, the color of exhaustion, of resignation. "He's a stranger, a human. You don't even know if what you felt was real or simply delirium from sleep deprivation." Her reflection offered no answers. Lysa moved away from the window. The suite's meditation platform called to her, but she knew it would be useless. She had tried meditation, had tried every technique known to Vesperi healers, had tried pharmaceutical interventions that left her feeling hollowed out and disconnected from her own body. Nothing worked. The noise was always there, pressing against her consciousness like hands against her skull. She thought of Kelrus, of the early days of their bonding when she had first understood what a gift his quiet mind was. He had been a scholar interested in ancient Vesperi philosophy and the nature of consciousness itself. Their courtship had been unconventional, she a young sovereign just coming into her power. He a commoner with no political value whatsoever. The seventh house had been scandalized. A sovereign did not bond with someone who could not amplify the empathic connection. What use was a consort who generated no resonance? But Lysa had understood something the advisors did not. A sovereign was meant to carry the weight of her people's consciousness, to be the vessel and the anchor. But even a vessel needs moments of emptiness. Even an anchor must sometimes be lifted from the depths. Kelrus had been her moments of emptiness. 53 years they had together. 53 years of being able to rest in his presence, to hear her own thoughts without the interference of thousands of other minds. When he died, a respiratory virus, sudden and merciless, she had thought the grief might kill her too. It hadn't. Somehow that was worse. Lysa moved to the communications terminal. A thought command would connect her to Theron, to the medical staff, to any number of people who would be concerned for her well-being. She dismissed the impulse. What could she tell them? That she had felt a moment of clarity standing near a human maintenance worker? That after 20 days of sleepless torment, she was considering seeking him out like some desperate fool? They would think her mad. They might be right, but desperation has its own logic. Lisa closed her eyes, let her consciousness expand carefully, testing the limits of the suite's soundproofing. The embassy hummed with human minds even at this hour. She could feel the night shift security personnel making their rounds, the kitchen staff preparing meals for the morning. Ambassador Wolf in her own quarters reviewing briefing documents with a mind that never seemed to stop calculating angles and advantages. And there, in the lower levels of the complex, in what the embassy directory labeled as staff housing quadrant, a pocket of quiet, small, distant, but unmistakable. Lisa's eyes opened. Her heart and organ remarkably similar to the human equivalent for all their physiological differences hammered against her ribs. "This is madness," she whispered. She was the sovereign of the seventh house. She had diplomatic responsibilities, security protocols, the weight of an entire civilization's expectations resting on her shoulders. She was also a woman who had not slept in 20 days and could feel her mind beginning to fracture under the pressure. The choice in the end was simpler than it should have been. The embassy at night was a different creature than during the day. The harsh fluorescent lights had been dimmed to accommodate the human circadian rhythm. The corridors were empty except for the occasional security patrol. Lisa moved through them like a ghost, her Vesperi physiology allowing her to walk in near-perfect silence. She had dismissed her guards a breach of protocol that would have Theron's robes cycling through alarm colors for hours. But she needed to do this alone. Needed to know if what she had felt was real or simply the hallucination of an exhausted mind seeking relief where none existed. The staff housing quadrant was in the embassy's utilitarian south wing. No shifting color walls here, no elegant architecture, just prefabricated modules arranged in efficient rows, each one a tiny island of privacy for the humans who maintained the massive complex. Lisa consulted the mental map she had extracted from the embassy's public directory. Unit 47 CD Carver, Atmospheric Systems Engineer. She found it near the end of the third row. A small trailer unit barely large enough for a single human. The windows were dark. The door, she noted with a mixture of relief and trepidation, was unlocked. "This is a violation of his privacy," she told herself. "This is beneath you." Her hand was already on the door handle. The interior of the trailer was exactly what she expected small utilitarian lived in, but not lived for. The air held a scent that took her a moment to place. Motor oil, and something sweeter. Synthetic jasmine from a cheap air freshener hanging near the small kitchenette. And silence. Blessed, perfect silence. Lisa stood in the doorway, letting it wash over her. For the first time in 20 days, her mind felt like it belonged to her alone. No empathic pressure, no cascade of other people's emotions demanding her attention. Just quiet. She moved further into the trailer. There in the sleeping area, separated from the main space by a thin curtain, she could see a figure in the narrow bed. D. Carver. Declan Carver, the full name had read in the directory. He slept on his side, one arm tucked under the pillow, his breathing deep and even. Lisa knew she should leave, return to her suite, find some other solution to her impossible problem. Instead, she moved to the small chair near the bed, sat down, let the silence enfold her like a blanket. Her eyes were closing before she realized it was happening. Her consciousness, so long held at painful attention, finally releasing its grip. The last thing she saw before sleep claimed her was the faint red glow of a digital clock reading 2:47 a.m. And then for the first time in 20 days, Sovereign Lisa of the seventh house slept. Declan Carver woke to the sound of breathing that was not his own. His eyes opened slowly, the way they always did since the accident. The Neuralink damage had affected more than just his ability to connect with other people's minds. It had left him with a slight temporal disorientation upon waking, as if his consciousness needed a few extra seconds to remember where and when it was. Nevada, the embassy, his trailer, morning, and an alien queen sleeping in his reading chair. Declan blinked. The image did not change. Sovereign Lisa, he recognized her from yesterday's ceremony, sat with her head tilted back against the wall, her mouth slightly open, her translucent hands folded in her lap. Her robes had settled into a soft lavender color that seemed to pulse gently with her breathing. She looked, he thought, with a surrealism that his still waking brain couldn't quite process peaceful. Declan sat up slowly, trying not to make any sudden movements. His mind raced through possibilities. Security breach. Some kind of test. A very elaborate dream brought on by the cheap whiskey he'd had with Silas last night. Lisa's eyes opened. They were silver. Entirely silver, no white visible, no pupil to track except for a slightly darker ring at the center. Those eyes focused on him with an intensity that made him forget to breathe. For a long moment, neither of them moved. Neither spoke. The trailer's ancient cooling unit hummed in the corner. Somewhere outside, a desert bird began its morning song. Then Lysa stood, her movements fluid, despite having just woken from what must have been an incredibly uncomfortable sleeping position. She was tall, taller than him by several inches. Her presence filled the small trailer like light fills a room when you turn on a lamp. "I apologize." Her voice was like nothing human. It seemed to resonate at multiple frequencies, simultaneously creating harmonics that made his teeth ache pleasantly. I should not be here." Declan found his voice, though it came out rougher than he intended. "You're damn right you shouldn't be here. How did you even—" He stopped, looked at his door. "I locked that. I always lock that." "You did not." Lysa moved toward the exit, and Declan noticed the faint tremor in her hands. The locking mechanism was not engaged. "I checked before entering." "Why would you check?" The question came out before he could stop it. "Why would you be trying to get into my trailer in the middle of the night?" Lysa paused at the door. Her robes cycled through several colors in rapid succession: purple-gray, a flash of amber, then settling into a blue so dark it was almost black. When she turned back to face him, her expression was impossible to read. "Alien. Utterly alien." "Because," she said quietly, "you're the first silence I've heard in the 20 days. And then she was gone, slipping out the door before Declan could formulate a response. He sat on his bed for a long time afterwards, staring at the chair where an alien queen had apparently spent the night watching him sleep. His mind, his quiet, disconnected, wonderfully useless mind, tried and failed to make sense of what had just happened. Eventually, he gave up and went to make coffee. The second night, Declan left his door unlocked on purpose. He told himself it was just to prove a theory, to see if last night had been real or some kind of waking dream. He went about his day, normally checking atmospheric pressure readings, replacing filters in the embassy's main circulation system, listening to Silas complain about the new requisition protocols, with only half his attention. But when evening came and he returned to his trailer, he found himself tidying up in a way he hadn't bothered with in months. Moved the half-empty coffee cups to the sink, straightened the pile of dog-eared paperbacks on his shelf, even repositioned the reading chair so it faced away from the bed, a gesture toward privacy that felt absurd given the circumstances. He lay down at his usual time. Read for a while Ursula K. Le Guin's The Dispossessed, a book he'd read at least a dozen times. The story of Shevek, the physicist from an anarchist moon trying to bridge two incompatible worlds. It felt appropriate somehow. At 2:47 a.m., the same time as the night before, he noted the door opened. Lysa entered silently. She had changed from her formal robes into something simpler, a flowing garment that shifted between shades of deep purple and midnight blue. Her silver eyes found him in the darkness, and for a moment they simply looked at each other. "You're awake," she said. "Seemed rude not to be, given that you're breaking into my trailer and all." The door was unlocked. "Yeah, funny thing about that." Lysa moved to the chair, sat with the same careful grace as before, but this time she did not immediately close her eyes. Instead, she studied him with an expression that might have been curiosity or might have been something else entirely. "Why?" she asked finally. Declan set his book aside. "You said I was the first silence you'd heard in 20 days. Seemed like maybe you could use another night." "You don't know me." "No, but I know what it's like to need something you can't ask for." That landed somewhere. Declan saw it in the way her robes flickered briefly toward gold, a color he was starting to associate with surprise or recognition. "Your mind," Lysa said slowly, as if choosing each word with care. "It generates no empathic resonance. Do you know why?" Declan touched the scar tissue at his temple absently. "Car accident. 5 years ago on Highway 95, just outside Tonopah. Drunk driver crossed the center line doing 90. I survived. My Neuralink didn't. The Neuralink allowed you to connect with other human minds. That was the idea. Share emotions, thoughts, surface consciousness. Supposed to be the next step in human evolution. Making us all part of one big happy hive mind." Declan's voice carried more bitterness than he intended. "When mine got damaged, the doctor said it couldn't be repaired. Something about the way it fused with my neural tissue. They could remove it, but that would probably leave me with permanent brain damage. So now I'm a flatliner, static carrier, whatever you want to call someone who can't connect. And your people consider this a deficiency. It wasn't a question, but Declan answered anyway. Most of them. It's hard to trust someone whose mind you can't touch. Hard to love someone who can't share what they're feeling directly into your consciousness. He thought of Sarah, of the way she'd looked at him in those final months, like he was a ghost haunting a body she used to know. Hard to keep relationships when you're basically a void where a person should be. Lysa was quiet for a long moment. Then, to me, you are not a void. You are the first room I've entered in 200 years that did not scream at me. 200 years is a long time to deal with noise. I am sovereign of the seventh house. I carry the empathic weight of 10,000 Vesperi minds. It is my purpose, my duty, my honor. Her robes had gone gray again, that exhausted color. It is also slowly destroying me. Declan looked at her, really looked. Saw the tremor in her hands that she couldn't quite hide. The way her eyes had a slightly unfocused quality, as if she was always listening to something he couldn't hear. The sense of someone holding themselves together through sheer force of will. How long since you actually slept? He asked. Before last night, 20 days. Before that, 3 or 4 hours every few days. Brief moments of unconsciousness that are not the same as rest. Jesus, that's humans would be dead. Or insane. Vesperi are more resilient. It takes longer for us to break. She met his eyes. But we do break eventually. Declan thought about that, about the weight of carrying 10,000 minds, about the slow erosion of self under that kind of pressure, about what it must cost to be needed by so many people that you forget how to need anything for yourself. Tell me about them, he said. Your people, the ones you're carrying. Why, Blyce? Because you're going to be here for a while if last night was any indication. And I figure if an alien queen is going to use my trailer as a sleep sanctuary, we might as well talk. Lysa's robe shifted toward gold again. Then surprisingly a warm amber that Declan instinctively read as something like amusement. Very well, though I warn you Vesperi history is long and often tedious. I've got time, and Declan reached for the stack of paperbacks on his shelf. If you get bored with your own stories, I've got others. He held up the Le Guin novel, then pulled out a few more Asimov's Foundation, Clark's Childhood's, and Banks's Consider Phlebas. Science fiction, stories about aliens and humans and the spaces between them. Stories about finding home in strange places. Lysa looked at the books with genuine curiosity. Your fiction, about imagined futures and distant worlds. Yeah, probably seems pretty quaint to an actual alien. No. Lysa reached out, her translucent fingers hovering over the worn cover of Foundation. No, I think I would very much like to hear your stories about imagined futures. My own present has become rather heavy. And so Declan began to read. His voice was not trained for performance. He stumbled over words, sometimes lost his place, had to backtrack. But Lysa listened with a concentration that felt almost sacred. And as he read about Hari Seldon and his plan to preserve civilization through mathematics and careful planning, he watched her robes gradually shift from gray to a soft, peaceful blue. By the time he reached the end of the first chapter, her eyes were closed. Her breathing had deepened and slowed. And when he set the book aside and whispered, "Good night, Your Majesty," she did not respond. She was already asleep. Declan lay in his bed listening to the sound of an alien queen's breathing mixing with the desert wind outside. Tomorrow would bring complications, questions, probably significant trouble once someone figured out where the sovereign of the seventh house was spending her nights. But that was tomorrow's problem. Tonight in a trailer in Nevada, two people who were not supposed to need each other had found something resembling peace. And for now, that was enough. By the fourth night, they had developed a routine. Lysa would arrive at exactly 2:47 a.m. Declan still didn't know why that specific time, but he appreciated the consistency. She would enter without knocking, move to the chair that was now unofficially hers, and wait while he selected a book. On the third night, it had been Asimov. On this fourth night, Declan chose Le Guin again. The Left Hand of Darkness, this time. A story about a human envoy trying to understand an alien world where gender was fluid and trust was hard-earned. This one's about an outsider, Declan said as Lysa settled into her chair. Someone trying to build a bridge between different kinds of minds. Appropriate, Lysa said. Her robes tonight were a deep indigo, calmer than he'd seen them before. Though I wonder if your author understood how difficult bridge building truly is. She understood better than most. Declan opened to the first chapter. Le Guin spent a lot of time thinking about what it means to be alien. Not just physically different, but mentally, culturally, the kind of different that makes real understanding almost impossible. And yet her characters try anyway. Yeah, they try anyway. Declan read for nearly an hour that night. His voice grew rough toward the end, but he kept going, wanting to reach a particular passage. When he got there, he read it slowly. It is good to have an end to journey toward, but it is the journey that matters in the end. Lysa's eyes were closed, but she smiled. Your Le Guin was wise. She was. Died about 40 years ago, but her books stuck around. The best minds often do. Lysa was quiet for a moment. Then Declan. It was the first time she'd used his first name. Something about it made the small trailer feel even smaller, more intimate. Yeah. Why are you doing this truly? You could have reported me to security, could have locked your door, could have demanded explanations or compensation or any number of things that would be within your rights. Declan set the book down, looked at her, this impossibly elegant being who had somehow ended up seeking refuge in his glorified closet of a home. You want the truth? I would appreciate it. I've been empty for 5 years, ever since the accident. And I'm not talking about the Neuralink. I mean, empty, no purpose that mattered, no connections that lasted, just going through the motions of a life that didn't feel like mine anymore. He paused. And then you showed up. And for the first time in half a decade, I felt like maybe being empty wasn't a curse. Maybe it was just space, room for someone else who needed it. Lysa opened her eyes. The silver of them seemed to glow in the dim light. You are not empty, Declan Carver. You are quiet. There is a difference. Yeah, what's the difference? Empty is nothing. Quiet is potential. Empty is absence. Quiet is presence without noise. She leaned forward slightly. You are the most present person I have encountered in 2 centuries. Declan didn't know what to say to that, so he said nothing. Just picked up the book again and kept reading until her breathing slowed and sleep claimed her once more. But her words stayed with him, echoed in his mind as he lay in his own bed, listening to the steady rhythm of her rest. Quiet is presence without noise. Maybe she was right. Maybe he'd been thinking about his condition all wrong, focusing on what he'd lost instead of what he'd kept. The ability to be still in a world that never stopped screaming. The gift of silence in an age of constant connection. Maybe being a void wasn't the problem. Maybe he was exactly what he needed to be. On the 5th morning, the world came crashing back in. Declan woke to find Lysa already gone earlier than usual. The chair was empty, the air still carrying a faint trace of something like ozone and jasmine. He checked the time. 6:15 a.m. She usually stayed until at least 7. Something was wrong. He found out what at 9:30 when Silas burst into the atmospheric systems control room with eyes wide and voice low. Man, you need to see this. Silas pulled up a video on his tablet. Security footage. Grainy night vision green. Timestamp 2:47 a.m. And there, clear as day, was the sovereign Lysa entering the staff housing quadrant. They're saying she's been sneaking out every night for the past 4 days, Silas whispered. Command is going crazy. The Vesperi delegation is locked down. And he looked at Declan with something between concern and fear. There's some guy from Homeland Security asking to interview all staff in housing units 45 through 50. Declan felt his stomach drop. What's his name? Webb. Agent Garrett Webb. And Declan, Silas gripped his arm. Your unit is 47-C. Before Declan could respond, his comm unit buzzed. A message in clipped official language. Declan Carver. Atmospheric Systems. Report to Security Office B7 immediately. Agent Webb requesting interview. Declan looked at the message, looked at Silas, thought about silver eyes and stories read in darkness and the weight of 10,000 minds pressing down on one person until they had no choice but to seek refuge in strange places. Yeah, he said quietly, I figured this was coming. He just hadn't expected it to come so soon. Security Office B7 was a windowless cube designed to make people uncomfortable. The walls were institutional beige, The air conditioning cycled on a frequency that created a barely perceptible hum, annoying enough to set teeth on edge, but subtle enough to deny when questioned. The chair Declan sat in was precisely calibrated to be almost but not quite supportive. Agent Garrett Webb sat across the metal table with the kind of stillness that came from professional training. He was in his mid-40s with salt and pepper hair cut military short and eyes the color of old steel. His suit was government-issue gray. Everything about him projected calculated neutrality. "Mr. Carver," Webb's voice was pleasant, conversational, the tone of someone discussing the weather. "Thank you for coming in. Didn't realize I had a choice." "You always have choices." Webb smiled without warmth. "Some are just easier than others." He opened a tablet, swiped through several screens with practiced efficiency. Declan watched and said nothing. 5 years of being unable to connect with other people's minds had taught him to read body language instead. Webb's shoulders were relaxed, his breathing steady. He was in complete control of this conversation, and he knew it. "You've worked at the Nevada Extraterrestrial Embassy for 14 months, Webb said. "Atmospheric systems engineer, solid performance reviews, no disciplinary issues, keeps to himself but gets the work done." He looked up. "Exemplary employee by all accounts. Is there a question in there somewhere?" "Just establishing context." Webb swiped to another screen. "Your Neuralink damage, the accident on Highway 95. Tell me about that." Declan touched the scar tissue at his temple without thinking. "You've got my medical records. I'm sure you know more about it than I do. Humor me." So Declan told the story. The drunk driver, the 3-vehicle collision, the 6 weeks in a Las Vegas hospital where doctors explained that his Neuralink had fused with his neural tissue in ways they'd never seen before. The choice between removal with permanent brain damage or living with a dead implant that made him functionally invisible to the connected world. Webb listened without interrupting. When Declan finished, the agent nodded slowly. "The doctors who treated you, did they mention anything unusual about the failure pattern?" "Just that it was rare, maybe 1 in 10,000 Neuralink accidents. 1 in 47,000, actually." Webb's eyes never left Declan's face. "We've been tracking statistics since Neuralinks went mainstream 15 years ago. Your particular type of damage, complete empathic nullification with zero residual broadcasting, has occurred exactly 6 times in the entire United States." Something cold moved in Declan's stomach. "So I'm a statistical outlier. Congratulations to me. 3 years ago, you were flagged by the National Neurological Security Database." Webb swiped to a new screen, turned the tablet so Declan could see. It was a government document, heavily redacted, but Declan's name was clear at the top. "Subject exhibits complete empathic dampening field. Radius approximately 10 to 12 meters. Potential applications for crowd control, intelligence gathering. Diplomatic security." The words on the screen seemed to swim. Declan forced himself to breathe normally. "You've been watching me for 3 years. Monitoring, there's a difference." "Is there?" Webb leaned back. "After you were flagged, certain opportunities became available to you, job postings that matched your qualifications, positions that just happened to be in areas of strategic interest. This embassy posting, for instance." "You're saying my job here wasn't legitimate?" "Oh, it's completely legitimate. You're good at what you do, but yes, Mr. Carver, you were placed here deliberately. We needed to understand how your particular condition might interact with Vesperi empathic abilities." Webb's expression didn't change. "Consider it field research." Declan stood up. The chair scraped against linoleum with a sound like a scream. "I'm done talking." "Sit down, Mr. Carver." "No, I came here voluntarily. I'm leaving the same way." "Sit down." Webb's voice hadn't risen, but something in it made Declan's hand freeze on the door handle. "Because we need to discuss Sovereign Lysa and why she's been spending her nights in your trailer." The room felt suddenly smaller. Declan turned slowly. Webb was watching him with the expression of a man holding all the cards and enjoying the moment before he played them. "How long have you known?" Declan asked. "Since the first night. We have sensors throughout the embassy. When the sovereign of the 7th house leaves her designated quarters, we notice." Webb gestured to the chair. "Now sit, please." Declan sat. Webb pulled up more files. Security footage, thermal imaging. Timestamps running from 2:47 a.m. to approximately 7 a.m. for 4 consecutive nights. We have to assume she's seeking something from you. The question is what? She can't sleep. The empathic noise from humans, from everyone, it's too much. My damaged Neuralink creates a quiet zone. That's all. That's all. Webb repeated the words like he was tasting them. A Vesperi sovereign leader of a civilization that spans 6-star systems breaks protocol to sleep in a maintenance worker's trailer. And you expect me to believe it's purely therapeutic. Believe whatever you want. It's the truth. Mr. Carver, do you understand what your condition represents? You're a natural empathic dampener. No technology required, no power source. Just your damaged brain creating a null field that affects one of the most empathically sensitive species in known space. Webb leaned forward. Do you have any idea what military applications that has? What intelligence possibilities, what this could mean for human-Vesperi relations? I'm not a weapon. Everyone's a weapon if you know how to use them. Webb closed the tablet with a decisive snap. Here's what's going to happen. You're going to undergo a series of neurological examinations. Completely voluntary, of course. We need to understand the mechanism behind your dampening effect. And if I refuse, then we have to consider whether you're compromising diplomatic security by allowing unauthorized access to your quarters by a foreign dignitary. That's a federal offense, Mr. Carver. Carries a minimum of 5 years. The threat hung in the air like smoke. Declan looked at Webb's steel gray eyes and saw no mercy there. No flexibility, just the cold calculation of someone who'd already decided how this story ended. How long, Declan asked, for the examinations? As long as it takes, in Tavayedes. Webb stood, straightened his tie. A car will pick you up at 0800 tomorrow. Bring personal items for a 3-day stay. Maybe longer. And Lysa, the sovereign will be informed that you're unavailable. I'm sure her people will find other accommodations for her insomnia. Webb moved to the door, paused. One more thing, Mr. Carver. Your cooperation in this matter will be noted favorably. Resistance will be noted differently. I trust you'll make the intelligent choice. Then he was gone, leaving Declan alone in the beige room with the uncomfortable chair and the knowledge that his quiet life had just become exponentially more complicated. The Vesperi Council chamber was not designed for human comfort. The geometry was subtly wrong angles that didn't quite align with Euclidean expectations, distances that seemed to shift when viewed peripherally. The lighting came from bioluminescent crystals embedded in the walls, pulsing gently in rhythm with the collective consciousness of the counselors. Lysa stood at the center of the circular room. Around her, 7 council members occupied elevated platforms, their robes cycling through colors that broadcast their emotional states with brutal honesty. Theron's amber flickered toward angry orange. Councillor Mara's deep blue carried undertones of disappointment. Elder Vanis, oldest of them all, showed nothing but gray resignation. 20 days, Theron said. His voice carried the harmonic of barely controlled fury. 20 days you suffered in silence. 20 days the council offered resources, medical intervention, anything you required. And instead you sought solace in the quarters of a human maintenance worker. Lysa kept her own robes carefully neutral, a pale lavender that suggested calm she did not feel. I sought what you could not provide. Silence. You sought impropriety, Mara said. Her platform lowered slightly, a gesture of confrontation. The sovereign of the 7th house does not sneak through corridors in the dark, does not hide in human dwellings like a fugitive. Does not show weakness, Vanis added. His voice carried the weight of 3 centuries. Does not demonstrate to potential treaty partners that she requires their citizens for basic biological functions. The words landed like blows. Lysa felt her robes flicker toward defensive red before she controlled the impulse. I demonstrated nothing except that I am capable of finding solutions when traditional methods fail. Solutions. Theron's platform descended until he was level with her. You compromised our entire delegation. The humans know now that their empathic noise affects us profoundly. They know that a single damaged Neuralink can neutralize a sovereign's connection to her people. Do you understand what vulnerability you've exposed? I understand that I have not slept more than a few hours in 23 days. I understand that my neural pathways were beginning to degrade. I understand that without intervention, I would have collapsed during these negotiations. and expose far more than a need for quiet. Lisa's voice remained steady, but her robes had shifted to steel blue. I did what was necessary to survive. At what cost? Mara demanded. Already the human security apparatus is investigating. Already questions are being raised about the nature of your visits. What happens when they discover that a damaged human can affect Vesperi consciousness? What happens when they realize they can weaponize this? Declan Carver is not a weapon. Declan Carver. Theron repeated the name with distaste. You know his name. You speak it with familiarity. How far has this compromise extended, Sovereign? Lysa felt something cold and furious bloom in her chest. I will not dignify that implication with a response. Then dignify this. Elder Vanis gestured, and a holographic display materialized in the center of the chamber. Security footage. Lysa's entering Declan's trailer. Emerging hours later, 4 nights in sequence. The humans have this footage. Their agent Webb has shown it to Dr. Hargrove. She has shown it to us. They are demanding explanations. Then explain to them that their sovereign found temporary medical assistance in the only place it was available. We have explained. They do not find the explanation satisfactory. Vanis waved his hand and the hologram changed. Documents, official communications, legal terminology that Lysa's translator rendered as accusations, allegations, security risks. They believe you may be compromised. They question whether these negotiations should continue. The chamber went silent. 7 pairs of eyes, 14 pools of silver light fixed on Lysa with varying degrees of concern, disappointment, and anger. Theron spoke into the quiet. You must end this association, Sovereign, immediately. No more visits, no more contact. The human Carver will be informed that his services are no longer required. No, the word came out harder than Lysa intended, but she did not take it back. No, Mara's voice rose an octave. You would prioritize personal comfort over the needs of 10,000 souls. I would prioritize survival over political theater. Lysa's robes flared gold, the color of defiance, of challenge. For 237 years, I have carried the weight of the 7th house. I have been vessel and anchor. I have set aside every personal need in service of the collective. And I did so willingly, gladly, because it was my honor and my duty. She moved toward Theron's platform, looked up at her oldest advisor. But I cannot serve if I cannot function. I cannot be your vessel if the vessel has shattered. And I was shattering Theron. You saw it. You all saw it. The tremors, the hemorrhaging, the moments where I could not remember my own thoughts, separate from the collective. We offered help, Theron said quietly. You offered medicine that dulled my mind. Meditation that did not work. Platitudes about duty and sacrifice. Lysa's voice broke slightly. You offered everything except what I actually needed. Which was, to remember who I am when I'm not being 10,000 other people. The words hung in the chamber like an accusation. Lysa saw the way the counselor's robes flickered, saw recognition there, and shame. Elder Vanis spoke. We have failed you, Sovereign. I see that now. We asked you to carry a weight no single consciousness should bear, and we told ourselves it was honor when it was simply necessity. His robe shifted to a deep, sorrowful purple. But the question remains, what do we do now? Lysa looked at each of them in turn. I will complete these negotiations. I will sign the treaty. I will do my duty as I always have. She paused. But I will not apologize for finding a way to survive. And I will not end my association with Declan Carver simply because it makes you uncomfortable. The humans will not allow it, Mara warned. Then they will learn that Vesperi sovereignty extends even to our choice of medical practitioners. This is madness, Theron said, but his voice lacked conviction. Perhaps. Lysa moved toward the chamber exit, but it is my madness, and for the first time in 2 centuries, it belongs only to me. She left before they could respond, left them in their chamber with their concerns and their politics and their inability to understand what it meant to drown in the consciousness of thousands. She had made her choice. Now she would live with the consequences. The medical facility was 40 kilometers from the embassy, hidden in the Nevada desert like a secret buried in sand. Declan had been driven there in an unmarked vehicle with windows that wouldn't open and a driver who wouldn't speak. The building itself was concrete brutalism painted beige. Industrial, forgettable. Inside was a different story. The examination room was filled with technology Declan had never seen. Neurological scanners that looked like they belonged in a science fiction film, monitoring equipment that tracked brain activity with resolutions measured in individual neurons. Three technicians in white coats who worked with mechanical efficiency and never made eye contact. "This won't hurt," one of them said. A lie, as it turned out. The neural mapping process involved electromagnetic stimulation of specific brain regions, while Declan performed various cognitive tasks. The stimulation felt like ice picks made of light being driven through his skull. His vision would white out, his hands would spasm, and through it all, the technicians took notes with clinical detachment. Subject exhibits complete suppression of empathic broadcasting in areas corresponding to damaged Neuralink integration. Dampening field extends approximately 11.7 meters from cranial center. No technological augmentation detected. Effect appears purely biological. They said these things like Declan wasn't there, like he was a specimen rather than a person. After 6 hours, they finally let him rest, gave him water and a protein bar, and 15 minutes alone in a room with walls the color of nothing. Declan sat on the examination table and tried not to think about what they were planning. Tried not to imagine the applications for a human who could shut down empathic connections, crowd control at protests, intelligence work with Vesperi informants, diplomatic manipulation. The door opened, not a technician this time. A woman in her late 50s wearing a suit instead of a lab coat. She had gray hair pulled back in a severe bun and eyes that had seen too much to be easily shocked. "Mr. Carver, I'm Dr. Evelyn Hargrove, Senior Liaison to the Vesperi delegation. Let me guess, you want to ask me more questions?" "Actually, I came to offer you coffee." She held up 2 disposable cups. Real coffee, not the synthetic garbage they serve in the cafeteria. Declan took one. The warmth of it against his palms felt like the first genuine thing that had happened to him all day. "What's the catch?" "No catch. Just thought you might appreciate talking to someone who sees you as a person rather than a research project." Dr. Hargrove sat in the room's only chair. "How are you holding up?" "I've been better. Your technicians have a real talent for making me feel like a lab rat." "They're not my technicians. This is a Department of Defense facility. I'm just an observer." She sipped her coffee, grimaced. "Though apparently even the real coffee here is terrible." Despite everything, Declan almost smiled. "So why are you here really?" "Because I wanted to meet the man who managed to give a Vesperi sovereign her first good night's sleep in 20 days. Dr. Hargrove's expression was unreadable. "And because I wanted to warn you. About, about what happens next. The DoD is very interested in your condition. They see applications that go far beyond helping alien diplomats sleep. They're talking about replication, about finding ways to artificially create neural dampening fields. They want to turn people into me. They want to turn soldiers into you, intelligence operatives, anyone who might need to operate in an empathically hostile environment. Bombardments." Dr. Hargrove set down her coffee. "And they want to know if it's possible to weaponize the effect, to create devices that could shut down Vesperi empathic abilities entirely." The implications settled over Declan like a cold blanket. "If they do that, they won't need me anymore." "No, they won't." Dr. Hargrove met his eyes. "Which means right now, while you're still unique, you have leverage. The question is whether you're willing to use it." "To do what?" "To set terms, to demand protections, to make sure that whatever comes from this research, you maintain some control over your own life." Declan thought about that, about Lysa and her desperate need for silence, about becoming a tool for people who saw human beings as resources to exploit, about the choice between cooperation and resistance when neither option led anywhere good. "What would you do?" he asked. "In my position." Dr. Hargrove was quiet for a long moment. "I'd ask myself what I was willing to sacrifice, and what I absolutely couldn't live without." She stood and moved toward the door. "Get some rest, Mr. Carver. Tomorrow they'll want to do invasive neural mapping. You'll need your strength." "Dr. Hargrove." Declan stopped her at the threshold. "Why are you helping me?" She smiled, and it was walked in knowing. "Because I've spent 30 years watching governments turn people into weapons, and I'm tired of pretending it's justified." Then she was gone, leaving Declan alone with terrible coffee and the knowledge that his quiet life was never coming back. The neural link cascade began at 1447 on the fifth day. Later, investigators would trace it to a software update pushed to embassy personnel during the lunch hour. A patch meant to improve connectivity. Instead, it created a feedback loop. 300 human minds all linked to the same network suddenly broadcasting and receiving at amplified intensity. It started small, a security guard clutching his head, a kitchen worker dropping a tray. Then it spread like wildfire through the compound. People stumbling, screaming, experiencing each other's panic, which fed back into the loop, which amplified the panic, which fed back again. In the Vesperi wing, Lisa felt it like a hammer to the skull. She was in her quarters when the first wave hit. Every human in the embassy suddenly broadcasting terror at maximum intensity. It crashed against her empathic senses with the force of a physical blow. She fell to her knees, hands pressed against her temples, robes cycling through violent reds and blacks. Theron was at her side immediately. "Sovereign, what's happening?" "The humans," Lysa gasped. Blood began trickling from her nose. "It's a cascade. They're amplifying each other. If it doesn't stop..." She didn't finish the sentence. Didn't need to. Both of them knew what happened when empathic feedback spiraled out of control. On Vesperi Prime 2 centuries ago, a crowd panic had killed 17,000 people in less than an hour. Lisa stood, tried to stand. The world tilted, more blood this time from her ears. The silver fluid that served as Vesperi blood looked black in the dim light. "Call medical," Theron ordered someone. "Get the Sovereign to the shielded chamber." "No," Lysa's voice was barely a whisper. "No, I can stop it. You'll kill yourself. They'll kill themselves if I don't." Before Theron could argue, Lisa ran. She moved through the corridors like a ghost, her robes leaving trails of color in the air. The empathic noise was a physical thing now. She could feel it pressing against her skin, trying to force its way inside. Every human she passed was a nova of terror. Every Vesperi was trying desperately to shield themselves from the onslaught. Lisa found the source in the main plaza. A crowd of nearly 300 humans, all of them caught in the cascade. Security trying to help but making it worse by adding their own panic to the mix. People on the ground convulsing, others attacking each other, their higher reasoning drowned out by the feedback storm. And in the center of it all, the empathic signature burning brightest. The nexus where the cascade was self-sustaining. Lysa didn't think, didn't plan, didn't consider the cost. She simply opened herself completely and pulled. The empathic absorption technique was forbidden for exactly this reason. It turned the Vesperi into a sponge for other beings' emotions, designed for small-scale intervention, helping a single person through trauma. Never meant for crowds, never meant for cascades. Lysa pulled anyway. 300 minds worth of terror came flooding into her consciousness. It felt like drowning in fire, like being torn apart from the inside. She screamed a sound that carried harmonics no human throat could produce and kept pulling. The cascade began to break. Humans stopped convulsing, started breathing normally. The feedback loop was disrupted because Lysa had become the ground wire, all that destructive energy flowing into her and dissipating into nothing. Except it wasn't nothing, it was her. Lysa felt something rupture inside her mind, felt her neural pathways burning out under the overload. Blood poured from her nose, her ears, her eyes. Her robes had gone completely black, the color of death. And then suddenly, impossibly, there was silence. Not the silence of the cascade ending. A different silence. Deeper. More profound. A pocket of absolute emptiness spreading outward from somewhere in the crowd. Declan, she couldn't see him through the press of bodies and her own failing vision. But she could feel the absence of him. The blessed quiet that was his mind cutting through the chaos like a knife through fog. People were moving aside, making room. And there he was running toward her, his face pale but determined. Lysa, her name in his mouth, no title, no formality, just her name. Declan reached her as her legs gave out, caught her before she hit the ground. His arms around her were warm and solid and most importantly quiet. The cascade noise that she'd pulled into herself began to drain away, flowing into his null field like water into sand. "I've got you," Declan said. "I've got you." Lysa tried to speak. tried to tell him to run to get away before the government realized what his presence meant. But darkness was pulling at her. The cost of saving 300 lives was her own consciousness, and the bill had come due. The last thing she saw before passing out was Declan's face, concern written there, and something else, something that looked almost like understanding. Then nothing. When Lysa woke, she was in the medical wing. Declan sat in the chair beside her bed, still wearing the same clothes now spattered with silver blood. Their eyes met. "You're an idiot," he said quietly. "I'm a sovereign." "You're an idiot, sovereign." But his hand found hers, held it gently. "Don't ever do that again." "I cannot make that promise." Through the window, Lysa could see media vans, security cordons. The cascade had been captured on dozens of cameras. Her collapse in the plaza, Declan catching her. The moment where an alien queen and a human engineer had become something other than their titles. On the holographic display across the room, news feeds played on mute. Headlines scrolled past. Vesperi sovereign saves embassy. Crowd mysterious engineer. Prevents diplomatic crisis questions raised about human-alien contact. Theron appeared in the doorway. His robes were ashen gray. "Sovereign, the council needs to speak with you immediately." Lysa didn't let go of Declan's hand. "Tell them I will speak when I'm ready." "This cannot wait. The humans are demanding explanations. The media has footage of Mr. Carver's effect on the cascade. They're calling him a miracle, a weapon, a dozen other things." Theron's voice dropped. "You cannot protect him from this, Lysa. You cannot protect either of you." Declan started to stand. "He's right. I should go. This is bigger than—" "Sit down," Lysa's voice carried command. Declan sat. She turned to Theron, and when she spoke, her robes flared gold. Pure, defiant gold. "Tell the council I will address them in 1 hour, not before." "Lysa." "1 hour, Theron. I have earned 1 hour." The old counselor looked at her for a long moment. Something shifted in his expression. Not quite approval, but recognition. He bowed, a gesture he hadn't made in 50 years, and left. Declan waited until they were alone again. "You're going to have to let me go. You know that, right?" "I know." Lysa's robes flickered through uncertain colors. "But not yet. Not like this." She stood despite the medical equipment's protests. Walked to the window where media vans circled like predators. For a long moment she was silent, watching the chaos outside. "For 200 years I have been sovereign," she said finally. "I have worn the crown, carried the weight, been the vessel." She turned to face him, and her robes stabilized into that fierce, challenging gold. "And I have never once asked what I wanted, never once chosen myself over duty. Lysa, I am done drowning Declan." Her voice carried a strength he hadn't heard before. "If they force me to choose between crown and survival, I will choose survival. I will abdicate. I will walk away from 2 centuries of duty and let them call me coward." In the doorway, unnoticed by either of them, Theron had returned. He made a sound, not protest, something closer to grief. "But first," Lysa continued, "I will try to build a world where that choice isn't necessary, where leaders can rest without abandoning their people, where silence isn't seen as weakness." She looked at Declan, really looked at him. "Will you help me?" He thought about everything that had led to this moment. The accident, the 5 empty years, the nights reading stories to an alien queen. The weight of being useful in ways he'd never imagined. He took her hand. "Yeah, I'll help you." Outside, the world closed in. Security protocols, media frenzy, the machinery of governments deciding how to weaponize what they'd witnessed. But in that hospital room, 2 people who had found silence and chaos made a decision that would change everything. They would not go quietly. That night, Lysa didn't sleep. Not because of the noise. Declan was there in the chair by her medical bed, providing the silence she needed. The medical staff had tried to separate them, citing protocols and regulations, but one look at Lysa's robe cycling toward aggressive red had convinced them otherwise. She didn't sleep because she was planning. Declan woke around 3 a.m. to find her surrounded by holographic documents, her fingers moving through virtual screens with practiced efficiency. Her robes were a calm, determined blue, the color of someone who had made a decision and was now executing it. "You've been busy," he said, his voice rough with sleep. "I've been preparing." She dismissed one hollow with a gesture, pulled up another. They think they have us trapped. They don't understand that sometimes the only way out is through. Through what? Through reimagining everything. Lysa turned to look at him, and there was something fierce in her silver eyes. Not desperation, strategy. I've made 17 calls to Vesperi counselors across 3 systems. I've drafted the framework of what I will later call the sanctuary doctrine. I've calculated exactly how much economic leverage I hold over human governments. Declan sat up, fully awake now. You've been planning a counterattack. Not an attack, an offer. She pulled up a star map, showed him the intricate web of trade routes and resource dependencies between human and Vesperi space. 40% of Earth's rare minerals, 60% of advanced medical technology, the entire deep space navigation network, all things they need from us. And you're going to use that as leverage to protect me. I'm going to use that to protect the principle of sanctuary, to establish that beings, human or Vesperi, have the right to spaces where they can rest from empathic overload. Lysa's robes shifted to warm amber. You're not just a man with a damaged Neuralink, Declan. You're proof that such spaces are possible. That silence isn't a weapon, it's medicine. Declan looked at the documents floating between them. Legal frameworks, trade agreements, philosophical treatises on consciousness and rest. She'd built an entire infrastructure in the hours since she'd woken. They're going to fight you on this. I know. Lysa smiled. It wasn't a diplomatic smile. It was the smile of someone who had finally decided to fight. But they need what I can offer more than I need what they can threaten. And for the first time in 2 centuries, I'm willing to use that. What changed? She looked at him. You did. You showed me that being empty, being quiet isn't a failure. It's a different kind of strength. Her hand found his across the space between bed and chair. I spent 200 years believing I had to carry everything. You taught me that sometimes the bravest thing is to set the weight down. Declan squeezed her hand, felt the coolness of her skin, the slight tremor that remained from the cascade. So what's the play? Tomorrow I meet with the human delegation in the Vesperi Council. I present the sanctuary doctrine as a condition of continuing treaty negotiations. Her robes flickered through several colors: gold determination, blue calm, a flash of amber that might have been hope. I offer them a partnership in understanding consciousness itself, not exploitation, collaboration. And if they refuse, then I make good on my threat. I walk away from the crown. I abdicate. Lysa's voice was steady. But I don't think they'll refuse. The humans need our resources. My people need this treaty, and everyone, whether they admit it or not, needs spaces where they can remember who they are when they're not being everything to everyone. Declan thought about that, about sanctuaries built not from stone but from silence, about a universe where being quiet wasn't seen as broken. Are you ready for this? He asked. For what comes next? Lysa looked out the window at the desert night, at the stars beyond, at the impossible distance between where they were and where they needed to be. No, she said honestly, but I'm ready to try. They sat in silence for a while, not the silence of absence or emptiness, the silence of potential, of 2 people who had found each other in the spaces between noise and decided that those spaces were worth fighting for. Declan, Lysa's voice was soft. Yeah, thank you for catching me in the plaza. Always. And in that moment, with dawn still hours away and the battle yet to come, they both understood something fundamental had shifted. They were no longer just a queen seeking sanctuary and an engineer providing it. They were allies, partners in reimagining what silence could mean. Outside, the Nevada desert waited for morning. Inside, 2 people prepared to change the nature of rest itself, confinement. Lysa discovered had its own particular texture. The Vesperi Council had not imprisoned her in any traditional sense. The quarters were her own. The door remained unlocked. But guards stood outside, respectful, silent, immovable. And every request to leave was met with the same gentle insistence. The Council believes it would be unwise, sovereign, for your own safety, until the situation stabilizes. 3 days she had been here. 3 days since the cascade. 3 days since Declan had been taken back to the government facility for what Dr. Hargrove euphemistically called extended evaluation. 3 days since she had last slept properly. The irony was not lost on her. Lysa stood at the window of her quarters watching the Nevada sun paint the mountains in shades of copper and gold. From this height, she could see the media encampment that had sprung up outside the embassy perimeter. Dozens of vehicles, satellite arrays, humans who made their living transforming private moments into public spectacle. She touched her fingertips to the glass. The surface was cool. Real glass, not the crystalline composite of Vesperi architecture. The humans had built this wing specifically for the delegation trying to create something that felt like home while being entirely alien. Not unlike what Declan had done in his way, creating a space that felt like sanctuary despite, or perhaps because of its strangeness. You would find this situation amusing, Lysa said to the empty room. To the memory of Kelrus that lived in the corners of her mind. Your wife, a queen of 10,000 souls held captive by her own advisors for the crime of wanting to survive. The memory did not answer. It never did. But she could imagine what he would say, something dry and philosophical, something about the nature of cages and the difference between those built by others and those we construct ourselves. Kelrus had been dead for 50 years, half a human lifetime, a mere breath in Vesperi terms. She had mourned him with the intensity that their bond deserved 2 years of ritual grief as was traditional, and then she had continued, ruled, led, been the vessel her people needed. But she had never stopped missing the silence he provided. The door chimed. Theron's harmonic, she would know it anywhere. Enter. He came in slowly, his robes a complex weave of amber and deep purple, concern mixed with frustration. He carried a data tablet, which meant official business, which meant more arguments dressed in diplomatic language. Sovereign, the human delegation wishes to meet. Let them wait. They have been waiting for 3 days. Then they are learning patience, a useful skill. Lysa did not turn from the window. What does the council say? Theron was quiet for a moment. When he spoke, his voice carried a weariness she had rarely heard from him. The council is divided. Elder Vanis believes we should accede to human demands. Return home, consider this treaty negotiation a failure. And the others? Councilor Mara wants to leverage the situation. The humans need our technology, our trade routes. She believes we can extract concessions in exchange for your cooperation. She wants to use me as a bargaining chip. She wants to use the situation to our advantage. There is a difference. Now Lysa did turn. Looked at her oldest advisor with eyes that had seen him grow from an ambitious young counselor into the gray eminence before her. And what do you want, Theron? He met her gaze, held it. I want my sovereign to be well. I want her to sleep without requiring external intervention. I want her to be able to carry the weight of our people without it destroying her. His robes flickered towards something that might have been regret. I want many things that I cannot have. You want me to be stronger than I am. I want you to remember that you do not have to carry this weight alone. But I do. Lysa moved away from the window toward the meditation platform she had not been able to use since arriving. That is what sovereignty means. The ultimate responsibility rests with me. The ultimate burden is mine to bear. It does not have to be. Does it not? Lysa's voice sharpened. Can the seventh house survive without a sovereign? Can 10,000 minds maintain coherence without a central anchor? We survived before you. We will survive after you. The words landed like stones in still water. Theron's expression immediately shifted towards something apologetic, but Lysa held up a hand. No, you are right to say it. She sat on the platform, felt the familiar hum of crystal against her legs. I have spent 2 centuries believing I was indispensable, that my people could not function without me. But perhaps, she paused considering, perhaps that belief was its own kind of cage. Theron sat across from her, a breach of protocol, but they were beyond protocol now. What are you thinking, Lysa? I am thinking about a human engineer who reads science fiction stories about imagined futures. Stories about societies that function differently than our own. About individuals who find meaning outside of collective necessity. She looked at her hands. Silver blood still stained the creases of her palms from the cascade. What if we have been doing this wrong, Theron? What if the weight I carry is not meant to be carried at all? You would abandon your people. I would reimagine what it means to serve them. Lysa stood and her robe shifted to gold, the color of challenge, of transformation. For 200 years, I have been a vessel. Perhaps it is time I became a teacher instead. I don't understand. You will. Lysa moved to the communications terminal, scheduled a meeting with the human delegation, and summoned the full council. All of them thereon. It is time I reminded everyone, including myself, what a sovereign can choose to be. 2 days into Declan's freedom from the research facility, Webb had released him to his own quarters as part of the negotiation conditions. He had an unexpected visitor. He'd been trying to read, but the words kept swimming on the page. Le Guin felt different now. The story of bridging alien worlds no longer felt like fiction. The knock at his door was hesitant. Not security, not Silas. Declan opened it to find a woman in her early 30s with dark hair pulled back in a professional bun, tired eyes, a visitor's badge clipped to her blazer. It took him a moment to place her. When he did, something cold settled in his chest. Sarah. She looked older than he remembered. 5 years could do that. Or maybe it was just that he was finally seeing her clearly without the haze of connection he'd once mistaken for love. Hi, Declan. Her voice was quiet. I don't have clearance to be here. I'm risking my security status just showing up. Then why are you here? She looked at her hands. Because I need you to know the truth. All of it. Declan stepped aside. Let her in. The trailer felt even smaller, with another person in it who wasn't Lysa. Sarah stood in the center of the small space, looking at everything except him. You know, I work for the Neurological Research Division now. Have for 3 years. Webb mentioned it. Did he mention that I was recruited 5 years ago, right before we started dating? Something in Declan's chest tightened. What are you saying? I'm saying that meeting you wasn't an accident. Sarah's voice cracked slightly. The project was already tracking you. Your accident had just happened. You'd been flagged as a potential dampener. They needed someone close to you, someone who could monitor your condition report on any unusual manifestations. So you were what, a spy? I was a graduate student who needed funding. Sarah finally looked at him. They offered me a full ride, research position. All I had to do was date you and keep notes on your behavior. Declan sat down heavily on his bed, the same bed where Lysa had sat nights ago, offering him a partnership based on honesty. Not this, never this. The drunk driver, he said slowly. Was that part of it too? No, Sarah's response was immediate. God, no, that was real. That was just terrible luck. Or terrible timing, depending on how you look at it. She wrapped her arms around herself. The Neuralink damage was genuine, but my presence in your life wasn't. How long, Declan's voice was flat, how long before you started actually giving a damn? About 3 months. Sarah sat in the chair, Lysa's chair, and Declan felt a flash of irrational anger. I fell in love with my assignment, Declan, and I hated myself for it. Because how could I tell you, hey, by the way, I was hired to spy on you, but now I actually care? Who would believe that? So you left instead. I left because I couldn't keep lying to you, because every time you looked at me, I saw that trust in your eyes, and I knew I didn't deserve it. She met his gaze. The Neuralink excuse was real. I couldn't connect with you. But not because you were broken, because I was. Declan thought about the 5 years since. The emptiness, the belief that he was fundamentally unlovable because of what the accident had taken from him. Did they know when you left? Did they know you developed actual feelings? They suspected. That's why they reassigned me to the lab, kept me away from field work. Sarah's laugh was bitter. Turns out I was too compromised to be useful. Good. They sat in silence for a moment. Declan tried to feel something, anger, betrayal, anything. But there was only a hollow recognition. The relationship had been built on a lie. The pain of its ending was real, but the foundation had been rotten from the start. Why are you telling me this now? He asked. Because what you have with the Sovereign, it's real. Sarah leaned forward. I've seen the footage. I've read the reports. And I know what it looks like when someone finds something genuine in all this noise. Don't let them take that from you. Don't let anyone, including me, make you think the silence is a curse. You want forgiveness? I want you to know that when I left, it wasn't because that you were broken. It was because I was. She stood, moved toward the door. For what it's worth, I've been sabotaging the replication research. Subtle stuff, misdirecting protocols. It's why they still haven't figured out how your dampening field works. I couldn't undo what I'd done to you, but I could slow down what they wanted to do with it. At the threshold, she paused. The Sovereign is right to fight for sanctuaries. The Neuralink was supposed to connect us. Instead, it's drowning us in each other's noise. We need spaces where we can just be quiet. Then she was gone, leaving Declan alone in his trailer with the ghost of a relationship that had never really existed. He sat there for a long time processing. Sarah's confession should have devastated him, should have reopened old wounds. Instead, it felt like closure. Because she was right about one thing. What he had with Lysa was real. Born not from surveillance or manipulation, but from desperate need meeting unexpected sanctuary. From stories read in darkness and the recognition that sometimes the most important connections are built on honest emptiness rather than dishonest fullness. Declan stood, looked at the chair where Lysa sat, at the books they'd read together, at the space that had become something more than just a trailer. He still felt nothing about Sarah's betrayal, but about Lisa, about the quiet nights and the weight of 10,000 minds finding rest, that he felt everything about, and that was enough. The conference room was neutral territory, not Vesperi, not human, just a space designed for difficult conversations between species that barely understood each other. On one side of the long table, Dr. Evelyn Hargrove, Governor Reeves' Ambassador Wolf, and Agent Webb. On the other, Liza flanked by Theron and Counselor Mara. Between them, a holographic display currently showing nothing but empty air and potential. Lysa had chosen her robes carefully. Deep indigo shot through with threads of silver calm authority, with undertones of complexity. Her hair was bound in the traditional sovereign's weave. She looked every inch the ruler of a civilization that spanned star systems. But her voice when she spoke was quiet, almost gentle. "Thank you for your patience." Dr. Hargrove inclined her head. "Your health is our primary concern, Sovereign. We were told you needed time to recover from the Cascade incident." I have. Lysa folded her hands on the table. "And I have used that time to consider what happened, what it means, and what must happen next." Governor Reeves leaned forward. "With all due respect, Sovereign, what must happen next is a full explanation of Mr. Carver's involvement. The public has questions. The scientific community has questions. And frankly, so do we. Declan Carver saved my life. He saved 300 human lives. I would think that would be explanation enough." "It's not about gratitude," Agent Webb interjected. "It's about security. Mr. Carver's neurological condition represents a potential threat to Vesperi empathic abilities. We need to understand if he can be weaponized." Lysa's voice remained level. "You may say it plainly, Agent Webb. We are all adults here." Webb had the grace to look uncomfortable. "The possibility exists. Many possibilities exist. The question is which ones we choose to pursue." Lysa activated the holographic display. A star map appeared: trade routes, resource nodes, the complex web of economic interdependence between human and Vesperi space. This treaty represents 10 years of cooperation, mutual prosperity, shared technological advancement. Do you wish to sacrifice all of that because of fear? "It's not fear," Governor Reeves said. "It's pragmatism. If the Vesperi can be neutralized by a single human with brain damage, then you misunderstand the nature of what happened." Lisa gestured and the display changed. Neurological scans, empathic wave patterns, data that would mean nothing to most humans, but which Dr. Hargrove studied with clear interest. "Declan does not neutralize Vesperi abilities. He provides a buffer, a space where empathic noise is dampened but not eliminated. There is a profound difference." Dr. Hargrove spoke up. "You're saying he doesn't shut you down. He just turns down the volume." An imperfect analogy, but essentially correct. Lysa pulled up more data. "My people have spent millennia perfecting empathic connection. We consider it our greatest strength. But we have forgotten that even strength requires rest. Even connection requires moments of disconnection." "What are you proposing?" Ambassador Wolf's eyes were calculating. "A collaboration. Lysa stood moved around the table. Physical proximity was important for humans. She had learned that. Declan Carver is unique. His condition is rare, but the principle behind it is not. Your species has been developing neural-link technology for decades. You understand neural modification in ways we do not, and we understand empathic regulation in ways you cannot. You want us to share research. Webb's voice was flat. I want us to create sanctuaries. Lysa's robes shifted toward warm amber. Spaces where beings human or Vesperi or any species we encounter can find respite from empathic overload. Not weapons, not tools of control, places of healing. The room went silent. Lysa could feel them considering, calculating, trying to determine what advantage they could extract from this proposal. It was Dr. Hargrove who broke the silence. The sanctuary doctrine. That's what you're describing, isn't it? It's in Vesperi ethical philosophy, the principle that all conscious beings require moments of isolation for psychological health. You have studied our culture. Lysa allowed herself a small smile. It's my job. Dr. Hargrove looked at her colleagues. What Sovereign Lysa is proposing, it's not just about Mr. Carver. It's about acknowledging that our Neuralink technology has created its own kind of empathic overload. We've been seeing increased rates of anxiety, depression, psychological breakdown. People can't escape the noise anymore. Exactly. Lysa returned to her seat. So we create spaces where they can, where we all can. Declan does not need to be a weapon. He can be a teacher. And in teaching, we learn to create what he provides naturally. Governor Reeves leaned back. This is a significant shift from the original treaty terms. The original treaty was about trade. I am proposing something more fundamental, a partnership in understanding consciousness itself. Councillor Mara's robes flashed orange alarm. Sovereign, this was not discussed with the council. It is being discussed now. Lysa did not break eye contact with the humans. I am sovereign of the seventh house. I speak with the authority of my position. And I am telling you that this is the path forward. Not exploitation, not fear, cooperation. Agent Webb's jaw was tight. And Mr. Carver, where does he fit in this grand vision? Declan Carver will be released from your facility. He will work as a consultant, fairly compensated with full autonomy over how his knowledge is shared. He will not be experimented on. He will not be coerced. Lysa's robes darkened to steel blue. These are not negotiable terms. You're not in a position to make demands sovereign. Am I not? Lysa gestured, and the holographic display changed again. Economic projections, resource dependencies, the complex reality of interstellar trade. 40% of your rare earth minerals come from Vesperi-controlled space. 60% of your advanced medical technology is based on our research. Your entire deep space navigation network relies on our coordinate systems. She let the numbers speak for themselves. Let the humans see exactly how much they needed what she offered. You could withhold these things, Ambassador Wolf said carefully, but it would hurt your people as much as ours. It would hurt both our peoples tremendously. Lysa sat back down, which is why I propose we not find out. Sign the expanded treaty, accept the sanctuary doctrine, allow Declan Carver his freedom and dignity, and in return I will personally oversee the establishment of the first human Vesperi Joint Research Center for Consciousness Studies. Dr. Hargrove was nodding slowly. This could work. If we position it correctly, mental health initiative, breakthrough in Neuralink safety, the public would support it. The DoD won't, Webb said flatly. Then the DoD will have to be convinced. Governor Reeves was studying the economic projections with clear interest. Or overruled. This treaty is bigger than one department's concerns. They talked for another hour, details and contingencies and political considerations. Lysa let Theron and Mara handle most of it. She had made her position clear. Now it was a matter of implementation. Finally, Dr. Hargrove stood, extended her hand across the table. We'll need 72 hours to get authorization from Washington, but I think we have the framework for an agreement. Lysa took the offered hand, the human gesture of sealing bargains. 72 hours. And in that time, Declan Carver remains in his own quarters, not your facility, or there is no deal. Agreed. As the humans filed out, Theron remained. His robes had settled into contemplative purple. You took a significant risk, Sovereign. If they had refused, they could not afford to refuse. Not really. Lysa felt exhaustion settling into her bones. But yes, it was a risk. Was he worth it? Lysa thought about gray eyes and stories read in darkness. About a mind that was quiet, not because it was empty, but because it was full of the right kind of silence. Yes, she said simply. He was worth it. The alarm began at 0317 on the third day. Lysa woke to the sound of sirens and Theron's voice through the communication system. Sovereign, we have a situation. Remain in your quarters. The rest was lost in a burst of static. Then another sound, lower, more ominous, a frequency that made her teeth ache and her robes cycle through panicked reds and blacks. The broadcast pulse. Lysa ran to the window. In the darkness beyond the embassy walls, she could see vehicles, military vehicles, and equipment she recognized from intelligence briefings. The same electromagnetic pulse technology that had been used in the Third Expansion Wars, designed to overload enemy communications. Adapted, she realized with horror, to target Vesperi neural frequencies. Throughout the embassy, Vesperi were screaming. Lysa could feel it through the empathic network, hundreds of minds suddenly experiencing what felt like their consciousness being torn apart. The pulse didn't just disrupt empathic connection, it amplified it, forced every Vesperi to feel every other Vesperi's pain in an endless feedback loop. Lysa's legs gave out. She collapsed against the window, hands pressed to her temples. Blood began flowing from her nose, her ears, the silver staining her white robes like spreading frost. This was death. This was how her people would die. Not with weapons, not with fire, but with their own gift turned against them. Through the pain, she heard explosions, felt the embassy shaking. Someone was fighting back the Vesperi guards, probably using what defensive systems they had. But it wouldn't be enough. The pulse was designed to make them helpless. The door to her quarters burst open. Theron stumbled in his robes, completely black, silver blood streaming down his face. Sovereign, we must the shielded chamber. He collapsed before finishing the sentence. Lysa crawled to him, checked his pulse, still alive but barely conscious. Around them, the embassy groaned like a dying creature. And then, impossibly, she felt it. Silence. Not the silence of death, the silence of Declan, moving through the embassy like a tide, a null field expanding outward from somewhere in the lower levels. Where the field touched, the pulse's effects diminished. Not eliminated, it was too powerful for that, but dampened enough that Vesperi could think, could move, could survive. Lysa forced herself to stand, staggered to the communications terminal. Most systems were down, but emergency channels still functioned. Declan. She didn't know if he could hear her, didn't know if the comms were even reaching him. Declan, if you can hear me, stop. You're burning yourself out. You can't maintain a field this large. No response, just the continued expansion of that blessed quiet, growing wider, covering more of the embassy, saving lives with every meter it spread, and killing him to do it. Lysa ran. The corridors were chaos, Vesperi guards trying to organize. Humans stumbling, confused, their neural links overloaded by proximity to the pulse. She pushed through them, following the empathic signature of Declan's silence like a beacon. She found him in the atmospheric control room, his domain. The place where he'd spent 14 months maintaining the systems that kept them all alive. He was connected to the embassy's infrastructure, literally connected cables running from control panels to the damaged Neuralink port behind his ear. His hands moved across keyboards and touchscreens with mechanical precision. Blood ran from his nose. His eyes were vacant, distant. Declan, Lysa grabbed his shoulders. Stop this. You're killing yourself. His eyes focused on her. For a moment, there was recognition there. Lysa, you need to get to the shielded chamber. Can't hold this much longer. Then stop holding it. Let the defenses handle. Defenses are down. Guards are compromised. I'm the only thing between 300 Vesperi and death by empathic overload. His voice was eerily calm. Mathematics are simple. My life for 300. Fair trade. No. Lisa's hands trembled. Not fair, not acceptable, not your choice to make. Declan turned back to the controls. I've amplified my null field through the embassy's atmospheric system, using the ventilation network like a carrier wave, but it requires active maintenance. If I stop, the pulse wins. Through the building, Lisa could feel the battle continuing. Human military forces trying to breach the perimeter. Vesperi guards fighting back despite the pulse. And in the center of it all, one damaged engineer holding the line through nothing but the absence in his own mind. There has to be another way, Lisa said. There isn't. Declan looked at her again. And this time there was something in his expression. Something that looked like peace. 5 years I've been empty. 5 years wondering what the point was. Turns out this was it. Being the space between. Being the quiet that lets others survive. Declan. Tell them I wasn't a weapon. Tell them I was just an engineer who fixed broken things. His hands never stopped moving across the controls. And tell them the universe isn't as broken as we think. Sometimes the empty spaces are exactly where they need to be. Lisa felt something tear inside her chest. Not physical. Deeper than physical. The recognition that sometimes the right choice is the one that destroys you. She leaned forward, pressed her forehead to his, let their minds touch in the way Vesperi did when words were insufficient, and showed him what he meant to her, what his silence had given her. Not just sleep, not just sanctuary, but the reminder that she was more than a vessel, that she could be a person again, that choosing herself wasn't betrayal, it was survival. Declan's eyes closed. Thank you, he whispered. Then his hands moved in a final sequence. The atmospheric system surged. The null field expanded to its absolute maximum, blanketing the entire embassy and extending beyond it, disrupting the pulse not just inside the walls, but at its source. The military equipment outside began to fail. Overloaded by the very field they'd tried to weaponize, feedback cascaded through their own systems, and Declan screamed. Lisa caught him as he fell. His body convulsed once, twice, then went still. His eyes were open but unseeing. The cables tore free from the Neuralink port, leaving blood and worse things behind. No, Lisa pulled him close. No, you don't get to leave. You gave me silence. You gave me stories. You gave me myself. You don't get to leave. But his mind was already gone. Not dead, she would have felt death, but gone somewhere else, somewhere her empathic senses could not reach, lost in a silence deeper than anything he had ever provided. Medical teams arrived, pulled Declan from her arms, rushed him to the critical care unit with efficiency born of desperation. Theron was there, recovered enough to function, trying to tell her something about the human military forces retreating, about arrests being made, about consequences. Lisa heard none of it. She stood in the atmospheric control room, surrounded by the machinery Declan had used to save them all, and understood the true cost of sanctuary. Sometimes silence comes at the price of everything. The medical report was clinical, precise, devastating. Massive neural trauma, the forced amplification of his dampening field through technological means, created feedback in areas of the brain that were never meant to process that kind of activity. Subject has lost higher cognitive function in multiple regions. Prognosis for recovery, minimal. Dr. Hargrove delivered the news 3 days after the pulse incident. Her face was drawn. She had aged a decade in 72 hours. What does minimal mean? Lisa asked. Her voice was steady. She had learned long ago how to contain devastation behind diplomatic composure. He's awake. He can breathe without assistance. Basic motor functions are intact. Dr. Hargrove paused, but he's lost most sensory processing. No sense of smell, no sense of taste. Touch is extremely limited in his cognitive processes. She trailed off. Tell me. He can't form new memories reliably. Can't process complex information. It's like someone turned off most of his consciousness and left just enough running to keep the body alive. Lisa closed her eyes. May I see him? Of course, but Sovereign, he won't know you. He won't remember the past weeks. Every time you visit will be the first time as far as he's concerned. Declan's room was white, too white, the kind of sterile brightness that denied the possibility of shadows. He sat in a chair by the window, looking out at the Nevada desert without really seeing it. Lisa entered quietly, sat in the chair across from him. His eyes tracked the movement, but there was no recognition there, just vague curiosity. Hello, she said softly. Hello. His voice was flat, empty of the dry humor that had made her smile in darkness. My name is Lisa. I'm a friend. That's nice. He looked back out the window. The desert is pretty. Yes, it is. They sat in silence, not the comfortable silence of their nights together. This was different, hollow. The silence of absence rather than presence. After a while, Lisa spoke again. Would you like me to read to you? I have a book, science fiction, stories about distant futures. Declan turned back to her. For just a moment, something flickered in his eyes, almost like recognition. I like stories. I know you do. Lisa pulled out a worn paperback. Foundation, the same book Declan had read to her weeks ago. She opened it to the first page and began to read. Her voice carried harmonics that human ears couldn't fully process. Each word resonated at multiple frequencies, creating layers of meaning and emotion. She read about Harry Seldon and his Mathematics of Civilization, about the attempt to preserve knowledge through dark ages, about hope in the face of inevitable collapse. When she finished the first chapter, Declan was asleep, peaceful, his face relaxed in a way it hadn't been since the pulse. Lisa set the book aside, looked at this man who had given everything to save her people, and asked for nothing in return. I will carry the silence now, she whispered. You taught me how, and I will make sure no one forgets what you did. She stood, placed her hand gently on his shoulder, then left him to his dreams, whatever shape they took in a mind that could no longer hold them. 6 months later, the first sanctuary center opened in Nevada. It was built on land donated by the state government, 5 acres of desert scrub land, transformed into something neither entirely human nor entirely Vesperi. The architecture blended both aesthetics, crystalline structures that caught the sunlight alongside practical human engineering. Gardens designed to soothe both species' sensibilities. At the center stood a meditation hall, silent, empty, perfect. Lisa stood at the entrance watching people arrive, humans overwhelmed by constant neural-link connectivity, Vesperi seeking respite from empathic duties. Others representatives from a dozen species who had heard about this experiment in conscious rest. Theron approached. His robes were calm amber now. The crisis months had aged him, but there was peace in his bearing that hadn't been there before. The council sends its regards, Sovereign. They wish to know when you'll return to Vesperi Prime. Next month, as scheduled. Lisa smiled. I split my time now, Theron. 6 months there, 6 months here. It's enough. You've changed the nature of sovereignty itself. I've changed nothing. I've simply remembered that a leader who cannot care for herself cannot care for others. She gestured to the sanctuary. This is what we should have built centuries ago, spaces where the weight can be set down, even temporarily. Through the crowd, Lisa saw Dr. Hargrove arriving, and behind her, moving slowly but steadily, was Declan. He had regained some function in the past months, could walk without assistance, could hold simple conversations. His doctors called it a miracle. Lisa called it the stubbornness of a man who fixed broken things. She moved to greet them. Sovereign, Dr. Hargrove inclined her head. The center is beautiful. It is a beginning. We have 12 more planned across 3 continents. Lisa turned to Declan. Hello, Declan. Do you remember me? He looked at her with those gray eyes, smiled slightly. You're Lisa. You read me stories. I do. That's nice. I like stories. It was the same exchange they'd had 100 times now. Each time new to him, each time breaking her heart a little more. But she smiled and gestured to the meditation hall. Would you like to see inside? It's very quiet. I like quiet. I know you do. They walked together toward the entrance. Dr. Hargrove fell back, giving them privacy. At the threshold, Declan paused, looked around at the gardens, the flowing water, the careful architecture designed to promote peace. Did I help build this? He asked. Lisa felt something catch in her throat. Yes, you helped build all of it. Good. He smiled, and for just a moment, she saw a flash of the man he had been. I like fixing things. You're very good at it. Inside the meditation hall, silence waited. The kind of silence that came not from absence, but from intentional peace. From the recognition that sometimes the most important thing consciousness could do was simply be still. Lisa and Declan sat on meditation cushions. She pulled out the worn paperback foundation, dog-eared and coffee-stained and perfect. Would you like me to read? Yes, please. So Liza read. Her voice carried harmonics of gratitude and sorrow and hope. She read about civilizations that fell and rose again, about the preservation of knowledge through dark times, about the mathematics of human behavior and the unpredictability of individual choice. And as she read, she felt Declan's presence beside her. Not the man he had been, but the man he was now. Still creating silence, still providing sanctuary, just in a different way. When the chapter ended, she looked over. He was asleep, his breathing deep and even. Lisa reached into her bag, pulled out something wrapped in foil. Synthetic chocolate, the banned kind, impossibly sweet and absolutely terrible for anyone's health. She'd found a black market supplier who specialized in contraband treats. She unwrapped a piece, put it in her mouth, let the chemical sweetness flood her senses. Declan had once told her it was 80% chemicals and 20% pure joy. He'd been right. Lisa sat in the silence, ate chocolate that tasted like memories, and felt for the first time in 237 years that the weight of sovereignty was exactly what it should be. Not a burden that destroyed, a responsibility that transformed. Outside, the Nevada sun began its descent toward the mountains. Inside the sanctuary, dozens of beings found peace in the quiet. And in a meditation hall at the center, an alien queen and a broken engineer sat in companionable silence. Not because they needed each other, but because they had learned through pain and sacrifice and impossible nights that sometimes the greatest gift one consciousness can give another is simply space to exist. The universe, Lisa thought, was still a poorly maintained piece of hardware, still vast and leaky and prone to catastrophic failure. But in the empty spaces between the stars and the moments of quiet between the noise, there was something worth preserving. There was peace, there was home, there was silence. And that finally was enough.